principal funding for Rights and Wrongs, the Human Rights television series, has been provided by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Body Shop Foundation, and the Aaron Diamond Foundation. Globalvision presents a new program on the cutting edge of change. This week, rape as a weapon of war. The world is outraged. Stop rape now! And women are marching.
There's still a tendency to see rape of women in conflict as an unfortunate thing, an incidental thing, or even in some cases, an acceptable thing. It is those attitudes that have yet to change in any way that translates international outrage we're seeing in Bosnia into international outrage against violations of women's human rights wherever they occur.
We'll introduce you to Charlotte Bunch, who is leading the struggle to give women's rights an international hearing.
Also, we will take you to Sarajevo to see what Joan Baez saw on a recent trip and a report from India on Tibetan refugees fleeing human rights abuses. In our cultural segment, Sweet Honey in the Rock, a premiere of their music video,
Women should be a priority. Women should be a priority. Women should be
all this on
women.
Rights and Wrongs, the television magazine of human rights. In New York, Charlene Hunter-Gault.
Women's rights are moving with new urgency and new demand for priority on the global human rights agenda. This urgency is fueled largely by the horror we witness daily from the former Yugoslavia. Reports of wanton rape and forced pregnancies in numbers that are staggering. Numbers that reveal the deeper horror of a conscious strategy, a systematic campaign. Rape is a weapon of war. In some countries, soldiers are being ordered to rape women. That's their job, and not just in Bosnia. Worldwide reports of sexual violence against women continue to surface, and there is history as well, somehow so easily forgotten. 1971, an estimated 200,000 Bengali women were raped by Pakistani soldiers. There was Vietnam, World War II, World War I. Yet it is now, in the wake of Bosnia, that our awareness is growing, and with it an international movement to stop the violence, to respect women's rights, and to bring the violators to justice. It's a movement that draws its strength from the outrage of the crimes and the courage of the women who offer testimony.
He said, "We'll make you have little Serbs, but not you older ones, the younger ones," and he turned and stared at the younger women.
And then they came and grabbed me by the breasts and pushed me onto the bed and raped me.
The Serbian irregulars took us to a prison camp. They beat us, raped us, and harassed us.
Oni su nam rekli da moramo ići Sonju, u zatvor Sonju. Tamo ima žena da siluju radi borbenog morala, za podizanje borbenog morala. I mi smo moramo ići, tako nam rekli.
There is definitely a pattern that emerges that rape is being used as a weapon of war in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
World attention is focused on the horror of Bosnia, where at least 20,000 women, mostly Muslim, have suffered organized, systematic rape. But this is a global problem. Rape is now being documented in other conflicts in other countries by groups like the Women's Rights Project of Human Rights Watch.
You have raging internal conflicts in Peru, in India, in Burma, in Somalia, in Liberia, where in all those instances the use of rape is being reported by parties to the conflict and where it has not yet drawn the kind of attention that the international community has given to the Bosnia situation.
In the Indian state of Kashmir, where separatists are struggling for independence, government security forces routinely rape women during military searches, according to documented reports from Amnesty International, Asia Watch, and Physicians for Human Rights.
They came at 11 at night. My husband was arrested. 6 people raped me all night and left at 6 in the morning.
There was no one there but God to protect us. They raped us in the houses. This is the end of our lives.
This is a rape room in Central Security Headquarters in Kurdistan, northern Iraq. Many prisons have them, according to Canon Makia, author of Cruelty and Silence.
More and more of this kind of story is now tumbling out of the lips of Iraqis. So we know that official rape is very widespread.
Just after the Gulf War, Makia also uncovered this personnel card, which indicates an Iraqi secret policeman was hired specifically to rape women.
He has two descriptions as to what he does. One is job, and it says fighter in the People's Army. But then it says task under that. And in Arabic that reads al-i'tida ala sharaf al-nisa, which literally translates into violation of women's honor. When you penetrate that honor, when you violate it in some form or another, you have broken the back of the whole family.
And in Somalia, men of one warring clan often rape the women of another.
These 2 years during the Civil War, it happened a lot. But before, no. It was very rare.
They think when they are raping women, they're actually raping the men to whom that woman, are alienated. So that's the whole thing.
Outraged by state-sponsored violence against women, women are now fighting back, marching, speaking out.
We protest the use of rape as a tactic and as a consequence of war.
Seeking the means and political clout to bring an end to the violations.
It isn't going to happen, not even in the Bosnia situation, unless there is continued and sustained pressure by women's human rights activists, relevant governments all over the world.
Pressure, rape as a weapon of war is now being documented. Names, dates, places.
Perhaps the only good thing that may come out of this war is that certain kinds of crimes, and I would rank rape at the top of that list, can no longer be ignored.
Jerry Labor represents one of many human rights organizations working to collect the documentation required to bring criminal charges.
I've read dozens and dozens and dozens of testimonies that have been collected by doctors at hospitals in Belgrade and in Zagreb.
The hope, a war crimes tribunal. Pressure. In Geneva this March, the United Nations Human Rights Commission redefined rape as a war crime. Geraldine Ferraro was the U.S. delegate.
For the first time, we called rape a war crime, defined it as a war crime. It is, under the Geneva Conventions, defined under inhuman treatment, under torture, but we specifically said rape is a war crime.
Recently, the United Nations Secretary General's report on a war crimes tribunal listed rape as a crime against humanity, acknowledging that women are being systematically targeted. But law professor Rhonda Copeland warns actions speak louder than definitions.
We've been at this historical juncture under different circumstances in the past, and rape has dropped out of the process when it came to prosecutions, for example, after the Second World War. There's got to be a lot of pressure.
Rape is a war crime, prosecute! Rape is a war crime, prosecute!
Pressure. More and more women are standing up, offering testimony, pleading for justice. Boston, a student rally for Amnesty International.
If I were in Burma, I would be in jail for 20 years. I can be raped. Most of my female students, female leaders, they were raped by the soldiers.
Pressure. Activists from around the world are now mobilizing women to raise money and awareness. A New York-based group called Madre brought women from Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, and other countries to the United States. Madre director Vivian Stromberg.
We have come together to demonstrate the universality of this crime and to demand immediate remedies. We are part of a worldwide, determined, and very moving network of women.
We are facing something new and unknown, and that we need all the solidarity of the women around the world, same from this community here. Thank you very much.
Madre's Mother Courage tour inspired a call to action in the aisles of a New York church.
As we light the third candle, we hold in our hearts women hiding tonight in places where rape is a weapon of war.
Probably most hopeful sign is the emergence of this international women's human rights movement that speaks out against abuses of women and is working to hold the international community accountable.
The fourth candle is for all of those touched by the ripples of fear sent into our communities after rape.
We say, listen. We say, hear us. Together, we demand an end to rape. We demand an end to war.
Now to someone who's been in the forefront of the women's rights as human rights movement. She is Charlotte Bunch, director for the Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rutgers University. Charlotte Bunch, thank you for joining us. The outrage and anger that women feel when watching reports like this is clear. What are women's rights groups and other organizations doing about it?
Well, I think women are doing a number of things. The first major sort of emphasis we had was bringing the visibility to women's rights at the United Nations World Conference in Vienna and showing that this kind of abuse of women is worldwide, has been taking place for many centuries, and that women want to demand that this be a priority of the international community.
That was that very effective tribunal that you organized at Vienna.
That's right. We organized a tribunal with women from 25 countries showing that the abuse of women occurs in the family, it occurs in wartime, it occurs in socioeconomic situations, and that these are human rights questions which have generally been ignored by the world human rights community.
But as I recall, as powerful as that meeting was, there were very few men who were attending the conference at that session. How do you move that powerful testimony onto the political agenda, which is still dominated by men for the most part?
Well, it's interesting because even though there weren't that many men in the room of the tribunal, we did have the tribunal taped into a larger room at the conference. And we heard later that a lot of men were watching the taped session, which was a little bit more removed. You didn't have to sort of be there and confront it directly. And that was a very important part. I think the third part is the way in which the results of the tribunal have been discussed in the media so that men hear from the media what a powerful event it was. We are doing a videotape of the tribunal. We want to have human rights groups show sections of that in meetings where they discuss what are women's human rights, what does this really mean. And I think the important thing of the tribunal was that it gave concrete evidence of what this means to women in their everyday lives, that this is not just an abstract demand for women's human rights. It really is a matter of life and death across the board in all kinds of areas for women.
The larger issue was the getting women's rights on the agenda at the International Conference on Human Rights. How successful do you think you were?
Well, I think we were very successful in that goal because as the conference evolved, in the beginning 2 years ago, there was no reference to women on the agenda whatsoever. And as it evolved over the 2 years, with women bringing this question at the regional level, in particular women taking the issue of what were women's human rights issues to their regional conferences and to their national governments, meant that by the time we arrived in Vienna, there was already an anticipation that women were going to be present and women were going to be an important part of it.
But when I interviewed you before you left for Vienna, your expectations were that you would be somewhat successful, but not greatly successful. But as I looked at the conference, you succeeded beyond most groups there at organizing and advocating.
Well, I think we did succeed beyond what we expected, in part because women were very well organized and women had agreed upon a series of fundamental demands and issues that we wanted to present together. So although there was a wide range of diversity of issues that women looked at within those broader demands, there were some common points. In particular, the demand that violence against women be looked at as a major human rights abuse united women across regional lines, across lines of those who were in the government, who were in non-government organizations. So I feel we were more successful. I should say also that I think that I didn't want to over-anticipate beforehand because of the same reason you just mentioned. Often women's activities seem very successful, but still don't get taken up by the men as a part of the important agendas.
What do you think was the major accomplishment there, and where do you go from here?
Well, I think the main accomplishment was to get the UN document for the first time in the history of the United Nations to identify specific women's human rights abuses as important questions for the UN.
That is the document that was the final document of the conference stating the goals and aims of the meeting.
The declaration of the conference at the end. And it includes 2.5 pages specifically on women's human rights abuse. And
which has never happened before.
Which has never happened before. And the most important one is the identification of violence against women in both public and private spheres as a human rights question. And this would have been unheard of even 2 or 3 years ago if you talked about domestic violence as a human rights question. People would have laughed at you. So this, I think, was our most important accomplishment.
Were there any disappointments or surprises?
I think the biggest disappointment we had was that we wanted to see the issues of women integrated throughout all the topics more thoroughly.
Like?
Such as the question of refugees. What are the specific problems of women refugees? There's one reference in the document on refugees to women having specific problems. We would have liked more acknowledgement that rape and sexual harassment of refugees is one of the major forms of human rights abuse they face.
That didn't get in there.
That didn't get in there in that kind of detail. In relation to socioeconomic rights, we would have liked to have more in the document about how development and structural adjustment policies adversely affect women. That didn't get in there.
How far at this point do you think the women's rights being recognized as human rights has to go?
Well, I think it still has to go a long distance because at this conference we were able to get the rhetoric, the recognition of the concept of women's human rights. But what we have to do now is the implementation. Now we have to get the United Nations and human rights organizations and governments to put money and structural resources behind implementing the promotion and the protection of women's human rights. And this is, of course, the more difficult task because this is where they have to put their money where their mouth is.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Charlotte Bunch, and congratulations.
Thank you.
You are watching Rights and Wrongs, Human Rights Television. Each week at this time, news and global perspectives you don't see elsewhere.
Our Rights Reel has more unique home video footage this week chronicling the world of human rights. In our lead story, French videographer Frank Vidal tells us what he saw during a recent visit to the mountains of India, which have become home to thousands of Tibetan refugees.
Welcome to Dharamsala in the mountains of India, one of 52 refugee settlements for Tibetans who have fled the human rights abuses caused by the Chinese occupation in their land. In all, there are 80,000 Tibetans in India. There are 5,000 people here, and another 7,000 living in Bailakupi, a farming district in the southern tip of India. Here, the Tibetans farm with the support of non-governmental organizations. There are schools, monasteries, and handicraft centers. But there is also a dream and an expectation to return home. I spoke with one of the monks.
We don't live to eat, we eat to live. So therefore, the aim behind our being as a refugee is to return back, is to return to Tibet.
My most emotional moment was watching refugees who just escaped from Tibet, meeting the Dalai Lama for the first time. They consider him as a living God and the embodiment of their struggle for freedom. In late April, I videotaped the Dalai Lama pleading for US support and heard him express disappointment at only getting a 5-minute meeting with President Clinton.
Meeting with the president, very short.
But my mind drifted back to the Tibetans I met in India and their hopes of a non-violent political settlement that will allow them to reunite with the families they left behind. This is Frank Vidal for Rights and Wrongs.
These civilians have been forced into joining Guatemala's civil patrols, paramilitary units organized by the Guatemalan army ostensibly to eradicate guerrillas. Human rights groups say they are being used to suppress dissent and organizing by peasants, sometimes by force. This footage was shot in Guatemala by peasant support groups. Tomas Lares Cipriano, a Mayan Indian peasant leader, was assassinated on April 30th after organizing a demonstration against the civil patrols. The Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Center for Human Rights calls for the abolition of these patrols. The center's director, Carrie Kennedy Cuomo.
When somebody is the victim of human rights violations, the best thing that you can do for them is let the public know about that person, because governments get embarrassed when the public finds out about it.
Guatemala's human rights violations have also been documented in films like Voices from the Darkness. It shows activist Justina Soxinol at work. On May 8th, her office was vandalized by unidentified armed men. The incident is being investigated. A Guatemalan official acknowledged that some civil patrol members have committed crimes, but he said the government is making a sincere effort to change things. For Rights and Wrongs, this is Philip Tomlinson.
Wearing a bulletproof vest, Joan Baez toured Sarajevo, the Bosnian capital that's been under attack for more than a year. The singer's trip in late April was arranged by Refugees International in response to a request to invite celebrities of conscience who could provide, as they put it, food for the heart. Baez was shown the damage the city has suffered and was greeted warmly in the streets. She was startled to find that amidst the rubble, a local theater company has for months been restaging the 60s anti-war musical Hair to bolster morale and attempt some semblance of normality. Several members of the cast have been wounded. Baez was invited to join them on stage. This footage from TV Bosnia showcases human solidarity at work. Here, Baez encounters a lone cellist, whose music provides a soundtrack for a city at war and a meeting point for two musicians. In writing about her visit, Joan Baez said the people of Sarajevo fear one thing more than death: to be forgotten. This is Lisa Guido for Rights and Wrongs.
Rights and Wrongs welcomes your written comments and suggestions. You can also order a transcript for $5 or a video cassette for $24.95 by writing to the Global Center, P.O. Box 311, Radio City Station, New York, New York 10101. Send checks or money orders only. Credit card holders call 1-800-541-2535.
More viewers are joining us each week on Rights and Wrongs, this week from Richmond, Virginia and Kingston, Jamaica. Welcome. Please tell your friends to watch and let us know what you think. We close this week with the premiere of a new video by an American musical treasure, the a cappella singing group Sweet Honey in the Rock. They have turned to the rhythms of rap to offer music with a human rights message. Women should be a priority. Enjoy. I'm Charlene Hunter-Gault.
Could be walking down the street, a gang of miscreants you happen to meet. High on drugs or whatever the case, they pull a knife or hold a gun to your face. You cry, yo, 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 can't you see I'm a man? But they just laugh and get down with their funky scam. You left to wonder, can I still call myself a man? Maybe the plight of women you can now understand. Stand up and check our history. Correctly line and define our identity. No more distortion, here but in a true proportion. Erase the guise of lies that has you dissing me. Check for our past and what we gave humanity. Light from the womb of creation was born the earth, the mother of all habitations. And from her loins the beginning population. Some call her Eve, others call her Lucy. Some try to blame her for the problems of society. But since we know that it was men who wrote the books, perhaps we need to re-examine. Take another look into Africa. The black land they called Al-Qaeda. people love. Here is a story, the teachers of our former glory, of queens and warriors, women strong and brave, refused to be subdued or taught how to behave. They clearly understood the power comes from within and should not be dictated by men. Some rule the nation seated on a throne. Some led in battle, fighting to protect their home. Some studied nature, the sciences of healing. Religion and the arts reflect their deepest feeling. Music, the list is practically endless. The contributions we have made are quite timeless. In almost every category you will find us singing or playing instruments. Upon the world we make our mark, we make a serious dent. We have influenced the sound. We offer soul that nowhere else can be found. Touching the feelings that are rich and profound. Words, let's talk about some writers who use the pen and page as weapons of a fighter. Educating to the poetry and prose, the essays and the novels and the stories that drove a message with a rhythmical spear into our conscious minds to make us adhere to life and its reality. Uncovering the clouds of mystery, creating hope while fulfilling our destiny. Check out the world, check out your nation. No respect for women is a no-win situation. We got to raise it to an up-iration. Keep your love for women on an Irie meditation. Cause women are the teachers and the healers of the land. Y'all know what I'm saying, so come on and take a stand to love and protect all the women in your life. Your mother and your sister and your daughter and your wife, your great-grandmother, significant other, and even all the women you don't know from one another. And the world's gonna be a whole better place. But so much more important, we may save the race. So women should be a priority, respected and upheld in society, given all the proper notoriety, never used or abused by authority. Women should be a priority. 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 Women